We need to have, yes, we know that Lorraine is out, Ariana is out. And we're short of a quorum. We need Luis Alejo for a quorum. Otherwise, you can meet as a body of the whole. You cannot take any actions, but you can recommend.
Might I recommend that we?
Yes, we know that Lorraine is out, Ariana is out. And we're short of a quorum. We need Luis Alejo for a quorum. Otherwise, you can meet as a body of the whole.
Delay.
Turning this off.
Might I recommend we go ahead and start the meeting once our technical issues are resolved and maybe save the consent agenda for the end, because that's the only action item requiring a vote of the members.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So we anticipate we're calling the meeting to order. Is that what we're doing?
We are calling a meeting to order, but without a full quorum.
Good. So we're going to call the meeting of the Monterey Salinas District Board Administrative Performance Committee meeting agenda at about 9:02 on October 9th. And I guess do we need a roll call?
Yes.
Roll call.
Okay, City of Gonzales, Lorraine Worthy. Absent. City of Seaside, Dave Pacheco.
Here.
City of Greenfield, Ariana Rodriguez. Absent. City of Monterey, Ed Smith.
Present.
City of Delray Oaks, Kim Shirley. Here. County of Monterey, Luis Alejo. So we're meeting.
So this is we are going forward as a committee of the whole. We lack a quorum.
Okay. So next would be public comment on matters not on the agenda. Members of the public may address the committee on any matter related to the jurisdiction of MST, but not on the agenda. There's a time limit, not more than 3 minutes for each speaker. The committee will take action or respond immediately to any public comment presented, but may choose to follow up at a later time, either individually through staff or on a subsequent agenda. Is there any public comment?
I do not see anyone with their hand raised.
Okay. So we're going to move forward to the action items. Is that correct, sir?
That'd be my recommendation.
Okay. 4-1 review of monthly report, August 2023.
Thank you, Chair. And the monthly report that was contained within your board packet shows that we had another stellar month since the implementation of the Better Bus Network past December. 22% jump in ridership over the previous August. Again, this has been the trend since the implementation of the Better Bus Network. We've been on averaging 20 to 25% increase in ridership a month. We had over 30,000 trolley boardings. One example of another example of the Better Bus Network working is our increase in productivity as well. So not only are we increasing sheer numbers, there are more numbers riding per bus provided. So our ridership productivity increased by 8.5% as part of that. So it's one thing just to have higher ridership. You can always throw more buses and get more people to ride, but are you using the buses efficiently? And that's a thing that we need to be concerned about. And the fact that our productivity is increasing while ridership is increasing means we did it right. So good job on MST staff. MST Rides program continues to perform. One thing that we can note, welcome, sir. We have a quorum. You're right there.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
And what was I saying? We saw a significant increase in August of delayed trips, delayed buses as a result, delayed passengers, both on the MST fixed route and on the MST Rides program, as compared to the month previously, and then comparing to the stats that we have through the end of September that we are not ready to publish yet, but it's an indication of what happens here every August with traffic. We are not immune to that with MST, the multiple events that are going on that are great for the economy, bad for traffic, delays our passengers. We're going to be working with our contractor to see if there's a way, if we know that traffic is going to be bad during certain times, if we can tweak the software to build some of that into the trip length. It does speak to the importance of things like the MST Surf busway, though, because during those times when we have planned or even unplanned traffic events, when the surf is complete, MST buses for that segment of Highway 1 will be immune from that. So that'll be a good thing for our passengers when that's complete. But that completes my review of the monthly report.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
I just had a quick question, Carl, on the rides on time passenger trips. Under people,
Right.
Nancy, there was just a much larger increase for the delayed, I guess, rides for more than 60 minutes, it increased to 10%.
Right. And if you look at, there is a, see if I can find the report quickly. There is a report that shows the reasons why the trips were delayed. And the big increase, and that was traffic. It was so the traffic delays in August were the same from a percentage standpoint as what we experienced in March during the worst of the storms. So that was the impact in August on traffic. And I'm not editorializing or anything, but I was saying you're going to see delays in August. And
so that's typical.
That is,
Mhm.
it is typical. This year was particularly bad. But when the MS, it also speaks to the importance of the surf busway. When that is available, we'll at least for some segment of that trip, be able to bypass that. And as we, I think points to the importance of other projects like projects TAMC is working on as well for, traffic circles and roundabouts and anything that can we do to relieve traffic because it only takes a few events with our infrastructure that we have in this county. It doesn't take much, whether it's storms or whether it's popular events. It doesn't take much to bring traffic to a standstill here.
Yeah.
So we'll just have to keep focus on that and not be surprised when it happens. I did look at September's figures for MST rides in particular, and we do have those calculated already. Not ready for publishing, but there's a significant improvement in September compared to August.
Okay.
Thank you. Is there any other committee questions? Any questions or comments from the public?
I do not see anything there for you.
So let's go on to 4-2. Receive an update on state ledger activities and review the initial draft 2024 state legislative program.
We have Michelle Overmeyer here.
Good morning, committee members. Michelle Overmeyer, Director of Planning and Innovation. I'm joined by Michael Pimentel, who is our state legislative advocate. I want to point you to a couple items as he starts his discussion. So in your full agenda packet on page 259, you'll see the full report on state legislative activities in the recent session that ended. And then in your committee packet, item 4.2, page 7, is where we start our discussion on the draft 2024 state legislative program. So I will turn it over to Michael.
Thank you, Michelle, for the introduction and chair and directors. Good to be with you again this morning. As Michelle had noted, I'm Michael Pimentel, legislative advocate with Shaw, Yoder, Antwi, Schmelzer, and Lang, our state lobbying firm, presenting to you this morning on behalf of our full team, which includes Matt Robinson, a partner with SYSL. And by way of background and to really set the stage for some of the discussion I'm going to go into in just a moment, I did want to also elevate that in my role representing MST, I also serve as the executive director of the California Transit Association, of which, as you know, CEO Sidoric serves on that organization's executive committee. And so as I provide you with an update today relative to actions here in Sacramento, I'm going to be covering a variety of items. The first will be the end of the first year of the 2-year legislative session. I will touch on the preparations for 2024 as captured in MST's 2024 state legislative program. And then I will want to close on implementation of new funding that was brought online in this year's budget for public transit. And so on that first item, I did want to acknowledge that the legislature adjourned for interim recess. That is the end of the first year of the 2-year legislative session on September 14th. Now, this year was, as you likely know, a historic one for California transit agencies as the legislature considered calls from the California Transit Association and from stakeholders across the state to restore $4 billion in one-time general fund support for transit capital projects and to also provide new funding for transit operations to address near-term budget shortfalls that immediately threatened transit service. Now, due to the sustained advocacy of the association and against the backdrop of a $30 billion state budget deficit, the legislature and Governor Newsom ultimately approved in the state budget a $5.1 billion multi-year funding package for transit capital projects and operations intended to address the most pressing and immediate needs of California transit agencies. Now, to ensure that these dollars are directed toward the legislature's top priorities of preserving transit service and advancing near-term capital projects, the state budget also instituted a series of new accountability requirements on regional transportation planning agencies who are charged under this budget with dispersing this funding, as well as on the transit agencies who will receive it. Now, I'm going to go into a bit more detail on this package and the accountability requirements in just a moment. But for now, I want to note that TAMC, as the pass-through agency for monies for agencies in Monterey County, will receive $54 million from this package over 4 years. Now, alongside that historic level of funding, the legislature also enacted a variety of measures that will ultimately be of importance to public agencies. And two in particular are proposed constitutional amendments represented in ACA 1 and ACA 13. Now, if approved by voters, ACA 1, which is passed through the legislature, would reduce the vote threshold for special taxes and general obligation bonds for affordable housing and infrastructure, including public transit capital projects, from the current 2/3 vote threshold to 55%. And ACA 13, if ultimately approved by voters, would require that any constitutional amendment that seeks to increase the vote threshold for state or local taxes, which is currently, frankly, being proposed by the California Business Roundtable, to ultimately pass the legislature by the same vote threshold it seeks to establish for those taxes. Now, this year also delivered on critical legislative priorities for MST that were separate and apart from the funding landscape. And one chief and notable accomplishment was the enactment of an MST-sponsored bill, SB 304, which was signed by Governor Newsom earlier this year. Now, that bill, beginning January 1, 2024, will increase the dollar threshold that triggers a formal bid process for the purchase of supplies, equipments, and materials by MST from $100,000 to $150,000, and also does provide that type of threshold discretion for services. Now, this is important in part because we have seen, of course, inflationary impacts on supplies, equipments, and materials across the board. And this adjustment captures that inflationary pressure and ultimately also brings MST's thresholds in alignment with FTA procurement standards. Now, additionally, over this past weekend, legislation that MST supported, including AB 557 HART, was signed into law. Now, this bill eliminates the sunset date on provisions of law that allow agencies to use teleconferencing without complying with Brown Act requirements during a proclaimed state of emergency. and it resets the requirement to redeclare a state of emergency from 30 days up to 45 days. Now, as we meet today, I will flag that still additional actions are forthcoming as Governor Newsom continues to review the remainder of the roughly 800 bills that he received from the legislature in the final weeks of session. And to that end, he was quite busy this weekend, having signed over 400 bills, leaving a balance for action later this week. And I want to emphasize that importance of later this week because he does have until October 14th to sign or veto all bills that remain on his desk. And in California, if the governor fails to act on a piece of legislation, it becomes law. And so that's something that we're going to be tracking and ultimately providing to MST staff a final report of actions as we see those final actions take place over the next 5 days. Now, with these actions and the start of the second year of the legislative session in mind, I also want to speak, as I noted at the front, to the 2024 legislative program that has been developed in coordination with CEO Sidoric and his staff. As this program is largely a rollover program relative to 2023, and for the sake of time, I'll only emphasize today the major adjustments between your adopted 2023 legislative program and your proposed 2024 legislative program. Now, the program continues to define the following objectives for MST. They are engage in and cooperate to provide support to partner organizations, support transit-related legislation, encourage the state to restore, preserve, and augment transportation and transit funding, and support reductions in burdensome legal and/or regulatory requirements. And new for 2024 and cascaded throughout those objectives is, for example, this new highlight for the need for MST to be engaged with the legislature to ensure that that $5.1 billion that I noted previously continues to flow to California transit agencies. And here I want to emphasize that this is, as I noted, a multi-year program. And given its multi-year nature, it did not see all of the $5.1 billion appropriated in this year's budget. Rather, we've seen movement to offer the first half of that funding, which would then need to be supplemented in the next fiscal year. And as part of that new action, the program does highlight the need for MST to work with CalSTA on implementation of the bill's accountability requirements, and I'll touch on those a bit more in a second, as well as on a new transit transformation task force, which is charged with looking at the state of public transit in this state and how we can move it forward toward fiscal solvency over the mid to long term, and to increase its operational viability, to attract riders, to improve safety on our systems, and to ultimately lead us to a greater footing that allows us to be successful as an industry. Now, with this addition, I also want to note that the program consolidates references to TDA reform, that's Transportation Development Act reform, which has been something that has been the purview of the California Transit Association since 2018. And that is because TDA reform will now be handled under a state-led task force, that being that Transit Transformation Task Force that I just mentioned, and for which there was an opportunity for MST to have a seat and engage in guiding ultimately the state's final decisions relative to transit performance metrics that apply on agencies as they look to access state funding. The program also does identify support for legislation to streamline procurements and contracting practices with an eye toward building on some of the successes we saw in this last year, where there were a variety of bills that moved forward to streamline transit project delivery and, frankly, infrastructure project delivery across the board, and to also make it easier to ensure that those projects are going to be delivered on a clear time horizon, recognizing, for example, the potential for litigation against large infrastructure projects. And then finally, I will note that the program also identifies the need to monitor implementation of the ICT regulation, particularly as that regulation's purchase mandate, which is already being applied to large agencies in the state, that would be agencies with more than 100 vehicles and maximum annual service, gets extended to small-sized agencies, those being with fewer than 100 vehicles maximum annual service in 2026. Now, on the implementation of the $5.1 billion, I will note that MST's engagement on this front is already underway, primarily through the California Transit Association's Transit Operations Funding Subcommittee. That subcommittee weighed in on the development of guidelines that took place earlier this fall, and that ultimately were adopted on September 30th. Now, those guidelines and the statutory intent that is identified in two bills, AB 102 and SB 125, really does direct funding from this $5.1 billion package to a series of specified priorities for the legislature. And these accountability requirements and this intent is really captured in a variety of reports that are going to be required to be produced by in your region TAMC in concert with agencies including MST. Now, the goal of these reports is to really specify how the region is shoring up support for transit, meaning increases in transit ridership, ultimately the levelizing of operational budgets to ensure mid to long-term solvency for the agencies, while it is also focused on delivering near-term capital projects that can be delivered to the public quickly, with an eye toward creating new opportunities for growing ridership in the regions. Again, the state's emphasis point here is making sure that agencies are ultimately going to be solvent over the long term to prevent what may be an additional request from the agencies to the state for still additional support. Here, the framing from the legislature has been the $5.1 billion is for the agencies to ultimately invest in the most critical purposes with an eye toward making sure that, again, that request for additional funds is not forthcoming. And when I emphasize that point, I want to note that one of the things that MST is going to be engaged on, and one of the things that in my role as executive director for the association we're going to be engaged on, is making sure that regions and agencies are in fact complying with these requirements. And that is because, as I noted previously, the funding that flows over multiple years, and it requires legislation to appropriate that investment. And with the legislature's interest in making sure that these monies are going toward their intended purposes, if they ultimately find that those monies are being misdirected or squandered in ways that don't deliver on their stated intent, we may actually see that those future years of appropriations aren't forthcoming. And so the general guidance that we've been offering, and here I'm mixing roles through my association, is really focus on the top priorities for these dollars. Shoring up operations funding for the agencies, making sure that they're able to maintain and restore service, delivering on near-term capital projects, ultimately deliver benefits to communities in the immediate term, and then to the extent practical, invest in new projects that can ultimately provide support for longer-term goals and ambitions for regions, for agencies, again, provided that there is funding capacity to do so after satisfying those initial needs. And so this time I'm going to conclude my report, as I've covered a lot of ground, and I will turn to the directors for any questions or comments that they may have on my report.
Do committee members have any questions? Yes, sir.
It's more for Carl, just like acknowledging John Laird authoring that bill that got signed
Yes.
on the procurement of supplies from 150 threshold to 150. Did we acknowledge that leadership? It's always nice that during when the session's over to kind of thank our legislators for carrying a bill for us.
We sent a letter from Anna Velasquez, Chair,
Oh, just-
on behalf of the board
Okay.
to John. We could do, we did a resolution for John earlier in the year for the $2.5 million.
Okay, all right.
We can do another resolution.
No,
We did-
if we did that already, I
we
don't
did.
want
We
to
sent a
overdo it either,
letter-
but.
We sent a personal letter,
Okay.
as soon as it was signed, it went
All
out.
right, all right.
in the summer.
That's great. And then in terms of budget ask for 2024, are there any items that we would ask for? If we don't ask our legislators, which we have four representing Monterey County. In next year's budget, they usually submit member requests in March or so to the respective budget committees. So would there be anything that we could ask for when they're soliciting any district projects that they might be able to make a pitch for?
Absolutely. We, if the opportunity arises this year, we were a little uncertain, given the budget situation, whether that was going to happen or not, but Senator Laird had indicated an appetite for more funding for the SURF, which we could use as our final cost estimates are coming in and our mitigations are becoming more well-known as far as the costs related to those. So we may be coming in looking for that. We also, like every other special district and city council and county board of supervisors, know we have a rare opportunity with Assembly Member Rivas being the speaker and having some influence. So absolutely, where we can support our infrastructure for innovative clean transit, whether it's hydrogen fueling or battery electric infrastructure, those high dollar items will be at the table where those opportunities exist.
Great.
Yeah.
And I thought so that there wouldn't be too many member requests considering the deficit that was projected in this year's budget. But when you read the budget trailer bills, there was a lot of local district projects that were funded and in big ways. So I just want to make sure that we just put that ask out there because that will come up in the next few months.
Chair, may I get our staff in Sacramento to weigh in on this?
Yes, sir.
Michael?
Absolutely. I would say as we approach early spring, what we'll want to do is work with MST to identify ultimately a reasonable request that can be directed to MST's legislative delegation. What we often find is at the start of the year, there is direction from leadership identifying what district requests can look like in terms of size and scope. And so we'll want to get an understanding of how much capacity is ultimately being provided to your representatives in the Senate and the Assembly, and use that to then identify what again could be a reasonable request from MST. I'll note that in this previous year, in 2022, we did have some success on MST's behalf in securing that type of district funding with support from Senator Laird, provided that there is opportunity to do that again in this coming year. There's that commitment to doing that on your behalf. And so ultimately, I would just signal that the capacity is going to be dictated by the state's budget projections as we head into 2024. There are some early signs that much like this year, we will be facing another deficit. It may not be of the $30 billion order that we saw in this past year, but maybe something that needs to be rectified and may put some downward pressure on capacity. All that said, there's likely to be some level of funding provided to members and senators to ultimately carry district requests forward.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee members? Yes, sir.
I actually have a question, Michael, and I'm sorry, you never don't ask questions you don't know the answers to, but I do know that early on with the budget projections, we had difficulty at the state level because of the delay provided this year in getting state income taxes turned in due to the floods earlier this year. Has there been any indication? Are there tax returns coming in now as the state controller's office given us any better indication of where things are?
Yeah, I think we are anticipating that come October, which is the deadline for these receipts, and there's going to be a report at that lags. We will have a better indication of where we're faring relative to the projections that were used to undergird the state budget. But I think from some of the reporting from the Assembly Budget Office, what we have seen is that projections have been bested by the level of funding ultimately received by the state. And so that may be a good sign, but all that said, I would want to reserve the ability to come back and provide more clarity once we see all the October filings presented in public, and we have a clear understanding of how things levelize across the many months.
Thank you. Any other questions? Any questions from the public?
So at this time, there's no formal action requested, but we do want any feedback you might have on the draft program.
Is there any comments from the public, I mean, from the committee members related to that?
Small changes from the prior program, right? It's in red or in blue, so.
It's pretty much
Same.
the same.
Yeah.
Very slight differences, but all consistent with our partnerships with other agencies and with the state. Anything that you wish to point out?
I'll say that we are going to be bringing this back to this committee in December for a final look and approval and recommendation to the full board. The California Transit Association is also updating their program, so we want to make sure that we're aligned there.
Great.
So if something comes up and you hear of something and you need us to look at it or modify between now and say the end of November, that's when we want to have feedback, because we'll be putting the agenda together for your December agenda, in the end of November timeframe. So let us know if something appears to you that you want us to include or change in any way.
So it sounds like we're moving forward as planned, and that's good. And thank you to the Mr. Robinson, I believe.
Pimentel today.
Okay. And so, thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Receive an update on federal legislative activities and review the initial draft 2024 federal legislative program.
And we have with us today our representative in Washington, D.C., Don Gilchrist, who I had the opportunity to spend several days with late last month in Washington, D.C. And if you think the changes to the state legislative program are small, our changes to the federal legislative program are smaller still, but we'll let Don give us an update on where we stand. Don? Can we unmute Don?
Maybe not.
Maybe not. Hold on just a second. There we go.
I'm unmuted now. Good morning.
Yeah, you're off mute now.
Excellent. I'm hoping to share a presentation of just 2 PowerPoint slides, but if I'm not able to do that, I'll talk you through it. Don Gilchrist, president and owner of Thomas Walters and Associates, and really appreciate the chance to talk to you about your federal update. And of course, the past couple weeks have been really eventful in DC. We had a possible government shutdown, and then once we got through that, we had the first speaker to ever be removed by a motion to vacate. And the fallout from that is still reverberating around Capitol Hill, and that's the dominant story this week, as House Republicans are trying to figure out where they're going and what they want to do. That turmoil in the House leadership has just deepened an ongoing impasse in the appropriations process that has been going on all year. So throughout the year, the House and the Senate have been taking very different approaches to the funding bills. In the Senate, there's been a very bipartisan approach where they're drafting bills that avoid significant cuts. It's not a unanimous thing over there. There's lots of amendments and lots of jockeying back and forth, but by and large, they have a consensus that they want to do bipartisan bills in the Senate. The House has been more partisan, and that's because the House Republican Conference is intent on cutting spending, especially in non-defense accounts. And it's been difficult for them to figure out how much to cut, because there is a third group of members that are the more conservative members of the House that want to cut even more than the House Appropriations Committee has been proposing. So as this is going on, it's been very difficult for House leadership to move bills through the floor process, and they're way, way behind in their work on the appropriations process as a result. When the new fiscal year started on October 1, there was a very real possibility of a government shutdown because of this impasse. Speaker McCarthy at the time had tried a couple attempts at passing Republican short-term funding bills to keep the government open. And having failed at that, he then did a 180 and took up a much more bipartisan bill, more in line with what the Senate was doing. And that quickly passed the House, and the Senate was signed into law and prevented the shutdown. That continuing resolution funds the government through November 17th. It does not include the prorated cuts that the House Freedom Caucus wanted very badly. It extends funding at current levels. So in that sense, it's a big win for the Biden administration and for Democrats in Congress, and it's a big loss for the House Freedom Caucus. So that left a very bitter taste in the mouth of some House Republicans, and was a big factor in Speaker McCarthy being removed last week. Still a lot of unfinished business, but the appropriations process is job one, to keep the government operating. Lots of other things are also needed to be done, but they have to pass the appropriations bills before the end of the year. The clock is ticking to November 17th. Almost certainly we'll need additional short-term funding authority beyond that. And I expect this process to take, best case scenario, into December. Worst case scenario, the chaos continues and we head into another potential shutdown. All of that's really going to become a lot more clear by the end of this week or next week as House Republicans figure out who they want to nominate to be Speaker. All members of the House vote on Speaker, but the majority party, in this case the Republicans, nominate somebody, and generally that nominee is approved easily. But we saw earlier in the year, in January, that hasn't been the case this year, and we could easily get into a situation like that where the optimistic schedule of hoping to have this wrapped up by the end of the week or into next week, that could fail, and we could be in another long-term debate within the House Republican Conference of who they want to be Speaker and what basic approach they want to take to the funding bills. I do want to speak specifically about the transportation funding bill, since that's so important to MST. Mr. Sidorik was in DC with the State Transit Association, and we were able to fold in some meetings on the appropriations process to meet with our delegation and some other folks. And so far in the House, they have passed a transportation funding bill that would include very significant cuts in transportation programs. However, that bill does not go after the funding that was provided in the bipartisan infrastructure law in 2021. And that's extremely important because that's where you get the big increases in your transit formula funding. And there was some advanced appropriations, advanced funding that was enacted as part of that is providing opportunities for things like capital investment grants, which is important to the SURF project. However, the House Republicans did go after grant programs in a very big way, and they were, by and large, refusing to appropriate additional money in the annual appropriations bill above and beyond that which was provided in the infrastructure law. So there's a net reduction in the opportunities for you to apply for competitive grants. And we're seeing this potentially play out in a big way in the New Starts and Small Starts process, which is so important to the SURF project. There will be at least $1.6 billion that's retained because of the infrastructure law. However, we always see the appropriations bills add on top of that significant funding, and the House and the Senate are very, very different in what they would be doing. Big cuts in that program in the House bill and substantial funding for it in the Senate bill. So that's really one of the big things that we're looking at. We also want to see some additional money funded to plus up the bus and bus facilities grants. The Senate has included $200 million in their bill for that, and the House has included zero. So that's a point of difference that we're going to be trying to advocate on moving forward. How does all this play out is very much up in the air and will be affected by the Republican leadership race. We're continuing to watch that closely. We want to see the transportation funding bill move in the right direction, and we're going to be advocating very strongly to prevent it from moving in the even farther in the wrong direction. So that's the federal legislative status. Just in terms of your program for next year, I can share that there is a great deal of continuity, very few changes. We're sticking with our approach, which is to advocate directly to Congress and the administration and to work closely with our partners such as CTA and APTA. We want to support all the funding streams that exist, whether it's in the infrastructure law, making sure that money gets implemented fully, and also appropriating additional money each year in the appropriations bills. You're looking for funding to continue to support your operations, but also capital projects for bus facilities and bus replacement. And we're looking at other programs from different agencies for potential help in the areas of renewable energy and credit assistance. So all of these things are carryovers. It's a lot of continuity, and we'll be looking forward to continuing to work with you to implement that platform that you adopt. And I sure would be happy to respond to any specific questions that you have about that. So I'll conclude my presentation at this point.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee members? Yes, sir.
And maybe for Carl as well, we all watched that historic removal of the speaker, which had never happened in US history. And it was all over the getting a continuing resolution with bipartisan support that I think only gets us till November 17th. So it will be interesting to see who becomes the next speaker, but considering that that was a basis for Speaker McCarthy's removal, what do you anticipate in that budget fight there being any impact to transit funding when it comes back up for another vote in November?
As I described in the transportation bill, so far the transit formula programs, which is your main concern, are left intact by the House proposals. The big impact on you in the current version of the House bill is on potential funding for the capital investment grants program, which is extremely important for the SURF project. We think the SURF project would probably be okay anyway, but we don't want that uncertainty, and we were advocating for our delegation to help us maintain our position in whatever legislation is adopted. Now, the concern is the next leader is going to be could be much less likely to be in a mood to compromise. And so as they bring the transportation bill to the House floor in a couple of weeks, will they then look to add additional cuts on top of that to satisfy the most conservative wing of the party? That is a very distinct possibility and could move over into these areas that we're very concerned about protecting. If that were to happen, I don't think the House would then turn around and then pass the legislation. They might amend it to put those cuts in, but we've seen some of the other appropriations bills go through this process where they cut and slash and cut. And then at the end, when they want to try to pass the bill through the House, enough Republicans say, I'm not voting for that, and it fails. So this happened with the agriculture appropriations bill. So it's very much up in the air about that. Now, one of the things that is interesting to watch this week is will the moderate wing of the party band together and effectively be able to insist that whoever is the next speaker has to accommodate some of their concerns? So with it so far, there's been 10 or 20 of the most conservative Republicans have been able to impose their will on the rest of the conference. Will House moderate Republicans be able to take a similar approach as people are asking for their support to be speaker this week? And will we see them be able to gain some concessions that might help the process be a little bit more sane and a little bit more predictable? So I'm very interested to see how it plays out. I think that it's quite possible that the moderate wing will be able to assert itself, but what happens then? There's a lot of jockeying back and forth that still has to come. So potentially could get worse before it gets better.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from committee members?
I'll just say that we were there a couple of weeks ago. I've been going to Washington DC fairly regularly since the late nineties. Position prior to MST took me there, and it's almost every year you go there, the staff will say this is the worst year yet, but this year you got the sense that they really mean it. It was pretty weird. The nice thing is Don mentioned the SURF. We received a little over $22 million. 14 of that is already appropriated. So that's money we have. It's this last $8 million in a really big pot of money that will deliver a project, will bring a project forward and complete it. So we think if anything's going to be cut, when you have projects in this program, like $500 million for BART to San Jose that just came out, it's going to be delayed at least another 10 years, according to their best estimates. We would think that that's where they're going to take a haircut versus stopping a project that is, imminently ready to move forward. So that's our hope anyway, but we're keeping our eyes on that $8 million and keeping everybody apprised of it to make certain that it's there.
Okay. Any comments from the public? Being none, I think we can move on because there doesn't take any action on this one. Thank you, Mr. Gill.
Likewise, we'll be coming back to the full board in February or in December with a final. If the committee sees something that they want to change or modify, let us know and we'll work it into the program.
Okay.
For December. Thanks.
4-4, receive results of Monterey Salinas Transit Director's actual report on MST's workers' compensation and liability programs. Thank you.
Good morning, committee members. Kelly Halkin, Director of Human Resources and Risk. And before you to talk about the draft results of our actuarial report, we are self-insured, which means that for both our programs for workers' comp and for our liability programs, MST has to pay forth a certain amount of money before our insurance carriers kick in the remainder if there's a claim or if there's issues. Based on that, because we are self-insured under the Department of Relations, we're required to conduct an actuarial study every 3 years. We recently went out to find a vendor and they provided us with we picked a vendor and that vendor recently completed their actual report. We've received the draft results, which were very positive for MST. Overall, we're going to see a combined decrease within both programs of $300,000, which is a huge decrease. Currently, our operating funds for Monterey Salinas Transit fund both our workers' comp and our liability programs. So given that, we're going to be able to decrease the amount of money that we put into these programs on a monthly basis, which is very good news for MST. And this releases more money for any additional costs that come forward through any other operating needs of the agency. With that, I'm available for any questions that any of the members have.
Any members have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
So now for the next 3 years, we just put in that same amount based off this report, is that, or how do we decide how much we put in for these liabilities?
That's a good question. So currently what we do for the liability program, it's a little bit different because you base the reserves on each claim that comes in. And then Sedgwick, who is our third-party administrator for our liability claims, they determine what those reserves are. And then all we're really putting forth is the deductible costs on a monthly basis of whatever costs are coming in for those claims. So that's what we're putting in. So what we're seeing is that based on the reserves that have been put forth, they're decreasing because the severity and the frequency of our claims have actually decreased.
So will our deductible go down then monthly?
That would be the overall hope. It just depends on the amount of claims that come in. So what we do see in our liability program in general, outside of workers' comp, is that we have Monterey County's become very litigious. And so anytime we have any type of slip fall, hit, even if they hit us, we potentially get sued. So, it's how we close those and the settlement results that we get with that really lends itself to the type of the reserving that we're having to see. Particularly if you have where you can settle a claim quickly, then that means the reserves fall off and there's no development of that claim, which is what they're looking at, is development of the claim over a period of 5 years to 10 years. And what they think that cost will you would have to allocate for that claim.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, going out to the public. Seeing none, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Let's go back, I think, to the consent agenda.
So moved.
You want to go back? Go ahead.
Do we have to do a motion for that?
Yeah.
You're consent, okay.
Oh, do it?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll second.
So there's a motion and a second for the consent agenda.
All in favor? Oh, I'm sorry, we're on the consent agenda. Okay, good. All in favor?
Aye.
It's all approved. I guess there's no closed session. The next meeting is December 11th, 2023 at 9 o'clock. At that note, we can adjourn the meeting.
See you all here in 9 minutes.
9 minutes. Bathroom break.
My union returned for 10 minutes.
Well, take it up with your union.